Go. Welcome to the Contemporary Issues class. Nice to see everybody here on a sunny blue sky day. Zoomers, can you hear us okay? Susan? Good. Okay. That's all right. Hi, Linda. Thanks for joining us today. Well, we're going to have a good discussion about thought, reason, and bias. Ronnie's going to tell us why we think the way we do and what biases we have. So, and that applies to religious thought, political, all kinds of thoughts. So very applicable to today. Let's see our usual announcements here. Zoomers, please mute yourself in the lower left corner of your screen so we can keep the noise down. And we are recording this for future playback. And any other announcements? I want to announce about the funeral for our class member Marilyn Gary, who passed away. There is no date set yet for it. Rev Mark is going to do that service. Sue?
I believe the date has been set.
Okay, I didn't hear as of
Yeah.
yesterday. I will email it out and let everybody know. And I will also email the address, so if you want to send a card to her husband, Joe, I can do that too.
And it's unit F, not building F.
Okay,
Building is the
on
one.
the address, okay.
Yeah.
I'll make sure I have the right address. Okay, that always helps. Very good. And other announcements, there's always things to talk about in the news. We could just talk this whole hour, of course, about Ukraine or the lifting of the mask requirements by the CDC and the state, and trying to return to some normalcy with the pandemic. So both those are big issues. But let's talk for a minute about Ukraine. I'm interested to hear what you all think about it so far. What can you say? What a sad thing to see happening today.
I'm so
Yes.
glad they
Go ahead, Louise.
held their ground.
Yes,
I thought that was great, and they still are.
they have done better than was expected.
I'm impressed with the civilians. And they're leaving their wives and children at the border and they're going back to fight for their country. Would we do that? You know,
Good
I thought,
question.
whoa, that's really
All the
powerful.
men stay and fight?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's very powerful to me.
More than 100,000 refugees going into Poland. Just incredible. Yeah. When I get that afterwards. Okay. March 10th. Okay, it's already been posted. So she says.
At 2:00.
Okay, 2:00. Okay, thank you, Sue. Okay, March 10th at 2:00.
I guess I didn't realize how, like us, Ukraine. By that, I mean, you see Afghanistan, you think it's horses and desert, whereas Ukraine is contemporary. It's,
It's a big
we've
modern
got some
city.
friends who have another company outpost there. It's like, it is a modern city.
Yeah.
I guess I didn't really think that or understand this.
And it also has a pathogen research lab that's in the middle of the city. There was a story yesterday that said they're trying to protect that it doesn't get bombed. And so any like Wuhan lab kind of thing, so that nothing gets released from there. So that's one other aspect that was just added about that. So many angles on this thing. It's just incredible.
It was quite remarkable that Zelensky stayed,
Yes.
took off his suits, put on his fatigues, got out in the streets with the people. He's done a lot of social media, which I think has impressed other countries around the world. That, oh no, this is our country, we're staying, and we're gonna fight. You know, it's interesting, is it the David and Goliath kind of thing, because they are, when you think of the size of the Russian army and military, and finally countries, Germany did a U-turn on their policy on yesterday or Friday, to support them and send aid of different types. And I'm like, okay, can you get it there like today?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, Zelensky had the quote, I don't need a ride, I need ammunition.
Yeah, I
Right.
saw that today.
Yeah,
There's, what also is sad is in Russia, there's a lot of Russians who have relatives in the Ukraine.
Right.
And they're like all upset about that too.
That's why they're protesting.
And they're protesting and I saw yesterday, because they're talking about, I've been watching CNN. That how unraveled Putin has gotten. And then his thing was, we want to fight, there's neo-Nazis in the Ukraine and we want to, and the newscasters are going, what? What?
And Zelensky is Jewish.
And when they said,
Yeah.
Zelensky's Jewish, so I doubt if there's any, yeah, you don't hear about any anti-Semitism there anyways to begin with in Ukraine. But I mean, it's so ridiculous to say, I mean, it's like he's just coming up with these such stupid things that they said they think he's getting pretty, maybe it's dementia, you know?
it sounds like fake news and alternate facts. doesn't it?
Yeah.
Alternate facts.
I guess I pray that the Russian people, and especially the army officers and the sports people, are going to turn against Putin. And this may be his downfall. That's what we should pray for.
Could be.
Yeah.
I think what surprised me, this is Linda on Zoom.
Yes.
I think what surprised me when I looked at the map was the size of Ukraine. If you take it and superimpose it on Europe, it pretty well covers the rest of that continent. Also, the number of strategic minerals and other products that come out of Ukraine that we're really not aware of, that obviously Putin is going after as well.
Yes, bigger than the state of Texas. Gives us a good comparison. Okay, we're gonna wrap up pretty quick.
Okay, I just did one thing, we told some people, we've been watching a lot of historical stuff. On Netflix and some things like this, and they're pretty accurate actually, in documentaries, what they call docuseries. And it's scary because how much we have not changed in 2,000 years. That really is bothersome, that he's doing this, like, really now, 2000? It's
amazing.
It's amazing and unsettling so much that.
And he has the codes.
Is the nuclear codes, that's another angle to it.
Exactly
But
right.
it's
Very
like, this
dangerous
isn't
time.
the Old Testament, you know, I mean, that's what it reminds, because I'm studying that, obviously. But that's what it reminds me of, they're all fighting each other, and then he's like, you know, he's not Alexander the Great, you know, going around and taking all these countries, and that's what they did in the Bible. This is not the New Testament, but I think he thinks he is.
Yeah. Well, let's all pray for it this week. It's not a foregone conclusion, but we'll meet again next Sunday and see where it's at then. Okay. Any other thoughts before we launch into
Just gonna
thought?
say, a friend of mine who has relatives in Finland, and they've been communicating online, obviously. They are terrified that if he's successful in Ukraine, Finland will be next.
Yes,
In Finland.
Finland.
yes, Finland or some other
Sweden.
country could be next. If he
Or
continues.
NATO.
Switzerland,
Yeah.
Poland, yes,
and he's on NATO.
it's very sad. Okay, Ron, I forgot to bring the lapel mic.
Oh, that's
today, so-
okay.
But Ron projects so good, we're gonna get our voices out there. And Ron, tell us about thought.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for coming this morning. The lesson this morning, we deal into the mind. The Amboy Dukes did a song in the 60s called Journey to the Center of the Mind. But the lesson this morning is pretty much drawn from an ebook from Scientific American called The Science of Thought, Return to Reason. So, and I bought it, and then I had to do a screen page copy of it. I couldn't just do a simple print of that ebook, but a good one. There's also another Scientific American article from a couple of years ago, How the Mind Arises. So I'll pass that around for people to just look at that, thumb into that one chart that shows all the parts of the brain and all the interactions. It's pretty incredible. There's also another good, great courses. Origins of the Human Mind by Professor Hinshaw. And it does a great job, particularly looking at how we form friendships, and then looks at some of the difficulties with the mind, some of the many kinds of mental illnesses, what brings them on, how to treat them, etc. So this is another good resource. Just take a look at the subtitles. Okay, well, let's get started. Let's jump to that first slot, number 2. We want to talk real quick. We have what we call objective and subjective evidence. Objective evidence is verifiable facts. Things like Newton's theory of gravity, what constitutes light, those kind of things. And then there's subjective information, which is opinions or biases. It often takes some verifiable facts and then maybe throws in some alternative facts and then filters in some bias, and you end up with subjective info. Next slide. So here's the big one. We have our psychological reasons inside of us. Everybody has a built lifetime psychology. And then we have our emotions, largely arising from our primitive part of our brain, our amygdala. And then we have this subjective information that's been tampered with. Hopefully, if you're I think a more intelligent person, you have a heavy percentage of factual information undergirding your subjective information. So you want to, and so when you deal with a problem of anything in life, you want to ask, how am I mixing these ingredients together to make this decision pie, as I will call it? You're taking your basic psychology, you're adding 2 tablespoons of emotion, and then you're throwing in the subjective information, which again, hopefully, has a high content of fact and not misinformation. So you take these 3 basic ingredients and put them in the oven of environmental factors. And that's your family, your friends, society at large, your physical environment. And then that's all the biases and influences that come from many, many places, including inside yourself. And you start asking yourself these questions. How does this affect my decision? How does this affect my acceptance and status with my family and tribe, especially your religious and your political tribe? How does this affect my worldview? And the implication of the information, particularly its impact on my wealth and my security. There's a lady that's had to deal with and she's come out, I think, very well. Next slide.
Liz Cheney.
Yeah. She's managed to hold her ground against tremendous forces trying to push her in different directions. How many have seen this movie? Okay. It's considered, it wasn't a tremendous box office success. As Reese Witherspoon and Tobey Maguire, Jeff Daniels, but it has a tremendous moral theme to it. So I encourage you to dig into your DVD library or Instagram and watch it and see what you think. It's a really, really good movie that makes you do some morally and line thinking. Next one. Then I'm going to talk real quickly about cognitive dissonance. I'm going to quote this gentleman. Sometimes people hold a core belief that is very strong. When they're presented with evidence that works against that belief, the new evidence cannot be accepted. In other words, the bias can be so strong that wham, the evidence doesn't get accepted. It would create a feeling that is extremely uncomfortable, called cognitive dissonance. And because it is so important to protect the core belief, they will rationalize, ignore, and even deny anything that doesn't fit in with that core belief. Next slide. And then I love the saying of the great scientist Richard Feynman. You deceive yourself without realizing. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself. You're the easiest person to fool. So I encourage everybody to always go back to those basic premises. Next slide.
Did you want to do discussion? also?
Yeah, we've got one coming up here, just 2 slides away. This is a advertisement that appeared in the Centennial Citizen just a couple weeks ago. And I said, oh, this is interesting. Bill Jack, renowned speaker from the Worldview Academy. And I went to that website, youngearth.org. And it's a Christian organization that basically teaches the world is only 6,000 years old. All this science baloney should be cast aside. And yet there was a list of doctors that were proponents of this stuff. And it just shows you what mindset can do. Next one. And now we're going to try to get into the subject, why we may try to fool ourselves. What are some areas, and I want to ask the class the question, what are some areas of life we don't want to know the truth about? For those that saw the movie A Few Good Men, Jack Nicholson says, you can't handle the truth. And then right here from Denver, a classic book of tremendous power, but also very disturbing and thought-provoking, was written by Marilyn Van Der Burg. And I don't know who's familiar with this book, but she won Miss America. But beneath it all, her father was coming to her bedroom just about every night since she was a 6-year-old girl and sexually abusing her. And she talks in her book about how to try to protect your little childhood ego, you sort of try to bury evidence and pretend and distort your mind. I'll pass this around. Look at it. Incredibly powerful book by a Denver native. Okay, but sometimes we don't want to know about the moral failures of family members, significant others, crimes, child abuse, thefts. What have they done? We don't want to hear bad news about the pillar figures of our religion or political views. We often don't want to know bad news about renowned historical or political figures. And even our own behavior is often sometimes things we want to embarrass. All of us have some things in their life. Hopefully you have done murder or committed assaults, but all of us have moments, particularly in our early childhood, usually, where we did some things that we're not proud of. I in 3rd grade, throwing a snowball at Susie, that kind of stuff, and more significant. But let's pose the question to the class. Are there some areas of class where you don't want to know the truth? That you really want to keep things buried? I've got that frame out there. No, not my child.
But some people just don't want to admit that we've had slavery, that we've done, the United States has done things. And people just don't want to talk about it.
Very good example.
That's a big one.
How about in your own life? Do you want to, are there things you don't want to know about your spouse, your significant other, your siblings, your kids, your friends?
Some people prefer not to know their diagnosis. I think most of us would like to know. There are some. I don't want to know, doc, how bad off I really am.
Okay. I also want to ask you the question, as we put Liz Cheney's up there, a picture up there. Have you ever taken a position that's kind of gone against your tribe, be it your family, religion, your political party, maybe even your country's position on something? That's a very personal question. I'm not sure who here can answer.
I have, and it's agonizing. It's agonizing against the flow. One of the heart of Jesus was the ultimate against the flow guy, and, anytime that you're against your tribe, it can be very difficult to deal with it emotionally.
How many here saw Lincoln on TV, the miniseries
I'm
this week?
watching it. It's long.
Okay, and where he took a position against the Texan War.
Oh, no, I didn't get that far. I only
Okay.
got the first episode.
Okay,
But he was big in anti-slavery right from the beginning, when he was in Springfield and stuff. I didn't realize he went back that far against it.
okay. Other, Bob, you had a,
In the field of religion, you wind up having to find a new tribe.
We did that several times.
Or capitulate eventually when the pain gets too great. A good example from somewhat recent history is the Iraq War, or the Iraq invasion. How many Congress people were against it until eventually they were so against the tribe being essentially American traditional principles, finally caved in, and they all ended up supporting it, with maybe one or two exceptions. All ended up supporting, even though they started out not in favor of the invasion. But by the time they were done, the pain was too great, and they finally capitulated. Said it was okay. It was only after the fact, after it became disastrous, that they then started going, see, we were right all along. Of course, then nobody's going to give them the benefit of the doubt. That's where you start, you get into the, well, you were before it, but you were before against it before you were against it.
any other examples? Bob?
Vietnam is an excellent example of that. My personal experience was I went into the military in '69 as a hawk. Fortunately, I was a physician, so I didn't have to fight, but by the time the thing was over, hearing the stories, seeing the wounded, all of that, I actually signed a letter that was posted in the Louisville press opposing the war and asking Nixon to bring the troops home. That was in '72.
Okay.
And almost got court-martialed for it.
Wow. My hats off. How many have seen the movie Born on the 4th of July? Tom Cruise starred in, it was written by Ron Kosick, I think is his name. I read the book. It's yeah. I've always admired people in my life that had the courage to stand up because it is so hard to do, particularly in like religious circles, particularly even some of the more strict churches like LDS to stand in opposition. And some of those churches takes tremendous courage. In fact, you'll probably be shown the left foot of fellowship at the front door. The left foot of fellowship. Okay. Ready. Okay, let's move on. All right. We looked at emotion and the part it plays in our decision making and our emotions. But the course there, if you can pass that around, does say, okay, yes, it is important not to have your emotions overrule your frontal cortex. Just pass it around for people to look at. Oh, it's already been. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. But the course points out that you certainly want emotion there too. If you throw away the emotion, they say, people who've had their emotional parts of the brain damaged, they have great trouble, even if they have great intellectual and frontal cortex. You need that emotion to help you put what I call weighting factors on the different things in your life. You have to be able to say, the health of my child is more important than the bunny rabbit in the backyard. You have to be able to weigh things. And your emotions do play an important role. So let's not, I have to be careful I don't become totally Dr. Spock and just become a computer and throw away the emotions. And remember Barbara Mandel's song, Loving you is wrong. I don't want to be right. Remember that one? That's, so we need the emotion part. Next one. Okay. Then there's the good old denial if it threatens your wallet. Upton Sinclair, who I think wrote The Jungle and many other pretty powerful books at the turn of the century. It's difficult to get a man to understand something when his job depends on not understanding it. We see that every day. People in industries that are threatened by the green movement, they don't want to give up, things like oil wells. Yeah, yeah, if it goes against. For those that study history, and Thomas Jefferson, Allison had the chance to tour Monticello, and he had his financial undergirding was his slaves to keep Monticello going. But if you read his writings, he was troubled by slavery. And he, of course, had fathered several children through Sally Hemings. Yeah, so he had a struggle with that. All right,
Dissonance there.
yeah. Next one. I love the song by Eddie Arnold, "Make the World Go Away." Get off of my shoulders. Sometimes I feel that way. Then there's the Robert Kennedy quote. There are people in every time and every land who want to stop history in its tracks. They fear the future, mistrust the present, and invoke the security of a comfortable past. Again, don't break my bubble, which in fact never existed. Next slide. Okay. So again, a lot of people are pretty much immunized. They've had their booster even against facts and reasons. There's a duck. There's the old saying. It's like talking to him or her is like, with facts is like water off a duck's back. And of course, there's the famous line from Paul Simon, Song of the Boxer. All lies and jest, still a man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest. That picture I love, my mind is made up. Don't confuse me with the facts. All right, next one. So let's get into the next two slides deal with biases, and we want to talk about them, get some good discussion. One of the first ones on there is the confirmation bias. That's where you pay selective attention to the evidence that supports your view and ignore or reinterpret or throw out the evidence that you don't like. That's what we call cherry picking the evidence. Anybody have any, the world is abounds at that. Anything that jumps out at you as good examples of cherry picking and the confirmation bias? We all tend to do it to some extent.
Well, a non-political example, non-controversial example is just simply lucky numbers. It's the ultimate confirmation bias. The only time you pay attention is when your number produces something good, and you see that number associated with something good. All the millions of other times, that number doesn't do anything for you. You just ignore those. You only focus. And the next thing you know, your string of experiences you're willing to acknowledge all seem to correlate around one number.
Another bias is the authority bias, and that's where you value the opinions of an authority, especially in something you know little about. So your authority can be many things. It can be Donald Trump. It can be the Pope. It can be a sports figure. It can be somebody on television. It can even be a favorite author or something. But we have to always be careful when we lock in the opinion of that authority. They often say, if you can get somebody to agree to the first 3 or 4 things you propose to them and say yes and nod your head, then you can start getting them to more likely to agree to the follow-on material. You tell people in sales, get them to agree to this and agree to that. Don't you think, sir, that this siding would really improve the look of your house? Yes. Get them to answer a bunch of yeses and then come in with that solution right behind it.
Does that work with children?
Okay. And again, what can some of those authorities be? There's the magazine of the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Watchtower. magazines they often distribute. So you can look to an organization, in that case, a religious organization, to be your authority. And of course, there's the anchoring bias, relying too heavily on one reference anchor or piece of information when making decisions.
Turn on
Forget
Fox.
parenting.
Or Dr. Bob, how about doctors today? Do people rely too much on their doctor, or do they come into their appointment and say, I read on the internet that it's something better than what you're telling me?
Yeah, used to they relied too much, now they don't rely enough.
Go ahead, Gene.
Well, there's a book I just finished called Last Breath. It's by an MD, an ICU doc, and talked about going against the tribe. Went against the tribe as far as normal protocols when you go into an ICU environment. He challenged that in an attempt to humanize what he has done with a group of supporters. But again, going up against orthodoxy, to challenge, to make the ICU experience more humane. And particularly with delirium and the after effects that you're probably well familiar with, that oftentimes occur. So there's an example of professionally challenging what is the standard fare. And he received a lot of criticism, obviously, but again, as you were saying, Ron, be able to stand up to your tribe, power through it. So, another example.
I think that's one of the strengths of this church. This church does not give you the left foot of fellowship. If you dare challenge something that's in the curriculum, shall we call it.
Ron?
So, yeah.
Would you say that, in related to Christianity, confirmation bias is a lot like things happen for a reason, the belief that things happen for a reason, instead of maybe looking at it scientifically and saying, well, wait a minute, everything's random out there. Everything happens. That just that belief. If people, they give her, see, you did that and see what happened. But
Okay.
I
Again, that's
don't know.
interpretation.
Yeah.
Interpretation. So. All right, let's jump to the next one. More biases, the belief biases. Evaluating the strength of an argument based on the believability of its conclusion. Here might be a case where you very much love your son or daughter, or a friend, or your spouse, and they're accused of something, and you say, well, I can't possibly believe that so-and-so would have done that. Therefore, I know all that other evidence is wrong. Okay. A couple other good quotes. Mark Twain, loyalty to petrified opinions never yet broke a chain or freed a human soul. So he certainly wanted to challenge petrified opinions. And Mitt Romney took some real heat out there in Utah, and still is. He called Trump's actions undemocratic. Well, the Utah GOP stood with the president. And then there's the in-group bias. We place more value on the beliefs of our tribe. And, we let the beliefs of our tribe dictate our position, our thoughts, and our judgments. And we all have to fight against that. Because who wants to make enemies? Who wants to go against the crowd? Yeah, and yet human nature shows that when push comes to shove, you often will get far more people that stay with the tribe rather than have the courage, profile and courage to go with what they think is right, hold their ground. So thoughts on these biases?
Ron, I have an observation or maybe a comparison to draw. So in Canada, there's an imperative to go with the collective. So you don't want to raise waves. They call it the tall poppy theory, where somebody pops up with a different opinion and they get clipped off. So it's a cultural imperative to go along, kind of get along and as a group, come to a consensus around what should happen. So, you know, it makes it very difficult to go against the grain. So people are very, like in board meetings, people are very quiet. You know, it's really hard to elicit feedback, even around big decisions. So, because nobody wants to step out. And then, of course, leadership means you lead from behind. You don't lead from ahead. So there are also cultural things that impact this.
Is that the Canadian culture, Susan?
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, I know that Asian cultures are like that too, very much group oriented, families important, people that came before us, that's what we're gonna live our life as, this group. Missy did a class on this one time, and it was years ago, and I still remember her talking about dealing with Asians in corporate situations and how Americans are very what word am I looking for? We think of ourselves, individuals, and when dealing with other countries like that, it makes it really difficult. And I guess Russia's probably authoritarian, and you don't want to go against, you might get killed if you do. That'll change your mind.
Do you think that a church like ours, which is mostly progressive people, puts peer pressure on conservative members to not really speak their minds? John, you're nodding. Would you think so?
Sure.
Is it intentional or not intentional?
I don't think so. I would just say it's exploitative.
Okay.
You're exploiting their need to conform.
Well, it got to the point that the United Methodist Church is considered a split. To resolve the issue, so you know it's powerful.
Well, you know, some of us
Not blaming-
progressives,
I'm not blaming anybody, just saying.
Yeah.
There's definitely tension.
I think we do sometimes have a bit of an arrogant attitude, like we really have evolved beyond the conservative viewpoints and we know best. And if you're not with us, then you're not really as intelligent or evolved as we are. And we have to be careful of that.
I think cognitive rigidity can be a part of the liberal camp as much as on the conservative camp.
Yes.
And there can be sometimes an elitism.
Yes.
I'm more intelligent than you commoners. So we have to, as you say, Steve, you're raising that issue here, guard against either side, putting the other side down.
I think so.
Educated versus the uneducated.
Right. So we all have biases, and you can see it even in sports competitions. You know, there's a swim meet, a diving meet between high school X and high school Y. And they're different counties, and all the judges from county X give their school the higher numbers, and vice versa. You can see it. We all tend to do that. Okay, next slide.
Football referees or.
Okay. Many faiths rely on a poly-bias, as I call it. Religion gets heavily involved in incorporation of biases. This is out of a church here within a few miles of where we sit right now. And their faith and practice section says, Scripture is the final authority in all matters of faith and practice. We recognize that it cannot bind the conscience of individual members in areas where Scripture is silent. But they basically say, we give Scripture the final ultimate authority. Cannot overpower Scripture with reason. But then others come back and say, many question whether the Bible, arguably a tangled mess of contradictions, and by no means traceable to a higher power, by Euclidean and scientific logic, can be utilized as the final authority. One thing scientists will say is that if you're going to prove something, if you tie your horse to a post, you got to go back to an origin fact for scientific study. So if you tie your horse to a firm hitching post that is rooted into fact in the ground, you've got a traceable grain of truth. But if your hitching post is tied to a plastic cup, or it's just a plastic cup, then your logic doesn't trace back to an ultimate provable source of truth. And that's a struggle that all religious faiths face. Okay. Other techniques for fending off disturbing evidence: try to reframe something as a moral issue when it isn't. Rant and raves that the tire store won't replace my out of warranty blown tire for free. They're a bunch of greedy thieves. It's a moral issue. And you look at the thing and says, well, we guarantee this tire for 50,000 miles. You've got 110 on it. So don't call it a moral issue. Also, they've proven studying the chess masters, the human brain. The brain tends to stick with what we already know. In chess, they found the great masters even. Once they find a solution to what's my next move, they often ignore other parts of the chessboard and stick with what they first jumped to. Okay, next one. Okay, we're going to quickly, a little lightheartedly now, 10 things you don't know about yourself. I love that first cartoon.
Read it.
There's something wrong with this mirror. Every time I look at it, some old fat guy is staring straight back at me. Okay. 10 things you didn't know. One, your perspective on yourself is distorted some. None of us has a perfect image representation knowledge of who we truly are. I sometimes say, here's God's knowledge of who you are. Here's what some other people think you are, and here's what you think you are. Hopefully, they're not too badly scattered. If you think you're, the next Albert Einstein and TV personality, but all your friends think you're a jerk, then, yeah. So we tend to do that. Sometimes your motives are a complete mystery to you. There's a test called the implicit association test. They say, we're going to flash some cards in front of you, and if this statement reminds you of this word or something, hit the button real fast. And that test, that implicit association test, tends to draw out, says, flashes words, asks you to hit the button as fast as you can when it matches a characteristic. And that tends to show what some of your, I call them inbred pre-biases are, and measure those. Next one. Whereas so the IAT, the implicit association test, tends to measure your nervousness, sociability, and other traits pretty well. But they find to measure your conscientiousness and curiosity, they need to do some deep thinking and evaluation. Next one. Here's one that I think all of us will agree with. Your outward appearances do tell people a lot about you. Which of those two guys did you trust with your?
The bottom one. You can't see from the back, the bottom one is poop.
Okay, so we do have to pay attention to our outward appearance.
Yeah.
Next one. Gaining some distance can help you know yourself better. Bob, I think you've mentioned the usefulness of mindfulness meditation. Tries to get you to slow down, look at yourself, do deep breathing, be self-aware. And they've said meditation is definitely proven to help you sort out your mind-body connection, improve yourself. Next one. They also find that we too often think we're better at something than we are. They call that the Dunning-Kruger effect. There's a little poster. Dunning-Kruger alumni. We all made the dean's list. They actually found, so the Dunning-Kruger effect, basically, the more incompetent people are, the the less they're aware of their incompetence. Pretty true. Although they say a moderate inflation of self-esteem has some benefits. Some rose-colored glasses tend to increase our sense of well-being. So it's good to try to, you know, if you're grading yourself on how well you play your trombone, tell yourself you're a little better than you are. Yeah, a little bit. It's when you decide you're the next Slide Hampton, when most people that listen to me will tell me, stick with your day job, right? Okay, next one. People who tear themselves down experience setbacks more frequently. Again, like that cat looking in the mirror, see yourself as the lion a bit. But some people suffer from self-belittlement and negativity, in which they see a cracked mirror when they look at themselves. And the cause can be childhood contempt and belittlement, violence and abuse, bad childhood, things like this. And they found that some with self-issues felt more comfortable around a partner who reflected their negative image back to them. That some people that are feeling really low, they want a partner that tells them they're a jerk and they're drunk and they're no good. So next one. Okay. Then of course you deceive yourself without realizing it. The second bullet there talks about, they did a test. They bring a bunch of students together and say, now this is a test, and we're not going to show the results to anybody but you, but it's just going to tell you how well you're prepared for the SAT or the bar exam or something. Again, nobody sees this but you. And they found that many students cheated on themselves. You know, like, I want to get a better view of how ready I am. And they found them, they would give themselves, when they were told they had 2 minutes to answer a question, they would, you know, sneak a third minute. They actually cheated themselves to try to inflate their viewpoint. So our desire for self-deception can arise from efforts to impress others. And sometimes when we're really working on something hard, the more effort we put into our performance, the more we tend to believe we're really exceptional at something. So, okay. Next one, let's jump to the next one. The ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the dedicated communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction, true and false, no longer exists. So you're most easily deceived if you're not good at questioning things.
What's the citation on that? Can't read.
That's Hannah Arendt, The Origins of Totalitarianism. Okay, so next one. Up here. True self is good for you. Most people believe they have a solid essential core of true self, and your view of true self affects your satisfaction with yourself. People feel most alienated from themselves when they feel they have done something morally questionable, especially dishonesty and selfishness. So it's good for you to have hopefully a pretty good self-image where you value, say, these are my values. And it is good that your conscience starts bothering you when you fall short. There's a great movie, another one I'll recommend. I think Steve said he saw it. Yeah. Defending Your Life with Meryl Streep, where a guy gets killed prematurely and you go into a place called Judgment City where your life gets put on trial. Great movie. Okay, next one. And true self, they find that we tend to feel like that we improve as we grow older a bit, at least in our moral precepts, our philosophical base, our intelligence. People connect with their personal improvements more than their personal deficiencies. So we tend to remember in life some of the improvements we've made. We tend to bury our shortcomings, and that's probably good. And they find that the further back in time we go, the more apt we are to identify with some negative aspects of our life. Often people say, I did that when I was 22, and I wish I wouldn't have done that, or I wish I would have seen the situation differently. Right. Also, sometimes insecure people tend to behave more morally. They say people who feel insecure about whether they have some positive trait tend to want to prove it. Sometimes, yeah, am I good enough? They'll try to step up and make an effort to bring their good side out. But sometimes, if we get too overconfident in how good and great we are, like there's a Jehovah's Witness poster, are you one of the anointed? Some who feel confident are so sure they're intelligent, generous, sociable, make less effort to prove it. They just feel supremely confident, like, boy, I've really arrived. I got it made. They don't see where they're a bit imperfect and they did improvements. Comments on that? Okay, we're almost done here. Next one. If you think of yourself as flexible, you'll do better. People with a rigid sense of self take failure badly. People who can understand a particular talent can be developed, accept setbacks better than those who can't accept them. People that really tend to do better are people that say, I'm not perfect at anything, but I want to get a little higher up the mountain, do better, I want to improve. You're better at that. Self is not a thing, but a process of continual adaptation to the previous one with the Gumby. Continual adaptation to changing circumstances, seeing ourselves as more competent, moral, and stable. It's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent. It is the one that is most adaptable to change. And we finish up with one more slide. The American Psychology Association consensus on critical thinking. You want to have openness. Try to keep your openness all through your life. You want to be objective and fair when analyzing arguments and reasoning. You want to have recognition of your own biases and prejudices. And you want to have reservation of judgment until you examine all of the facts. I love that quote by Judge Judy. Either you're playing dumb or it's not an act. Okay, and that last one, that's some discussion. So we've touched on a lot of things here today. Thoughts on your journey in life?
Ron, very helpful as always. Thank you, thank you. I just want to slip this one in. I don't have the correct title. I believe it's the Storyteller's Paradox. If you're interested, I'll bring it next week. Anyway, brand new book, documented with good research as you've provided in your presentation. The essence is that stories do a better job of changing behavior than objective facts. A good story, whether it be biblical stories or Putin's grandiosity concerning the great Russian Empire and that Ukraine is really a part of this vast empire which belongs to us, or Samson and Delilah. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, Samson and Delilah. David and Goliath. To illustrate a point, Mark Feldmar today, wonderful takeaways, Omar. But the one we'll all remember was his bike trip around Hawaii and Joanne. Don't judge a person by the cover, hearing aids and behavior until he found out exactly what went on. But the power of a story and the narrative, conspiracy theories are stories. The power of stories has more power, proven research, verifiable, than do objective facts. A good story, and we'll remember Mark Feldmar's story about Hawaii and the bike trip, will we not? So I certainly will. I certainly will. But anyway, just kind of feeds into what you were doing such a good job of illustrating today.
He always tells a story.
Yes.
In
Oh,
every,
yes.
at least several stories.
Oh, yes.
Right,
And those are
like very fairy tales, fairy tales.
That's why Jesus told things as parables, stories, yeah.
And if you think again of Lincoln, the miniseries going on right now, he abounded in telling little stories to the jury. He in his debates with Stephen Douglas, he at one point says, there's a great difference between a chestnut horse and a horse chestnut. He would often tell very poignant little tales, even as he was testifying to the juries in the backwoods.
I think you don't think with that he was like that funny, like he told stories all the time to different, it was mostly men that, you know, they associated with. If they were waiting for this or doing that, he always had a story, and we never saw that side, well, we didn't see any side of it, but I mean, when you think of Lincoln, you think of him as very serious, and he wasn't. You know, he wasn't some things, but his real personality, and that's really a good series. I gotta watch the rest of it. I watched the first 2 hours.
Okay. Then on PBS,
No, it was on History Channel.
History Channel, okay.
You know, just a point that the perspective we have on our stories. When I was a kid, I just thought Samson, the Bible character Samson, he was one of the first superheroes. I so admired him. When you read that story, when I read that story today, what a jerk. Moron. He was a moron. He was a gambler, a murderer, killed 1,000 pieces of people with a jawbone of an ass.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. Fell for Delilah's story over and over. What's the secret? Oh, my secret. He lied to her 3 or 4 times, and then finally the idiot said, oh, it's my long hair. You got my hair, I'll lose my story.
Oh, that's right.
What a guy.
Yeah.
Different perspective.
Yeah, again, I always like to encourage people to watch movies. I think Pleasantville, I'm recommending that one. There's also the movie Great Debaters, The Help, good moral message, 12 Years a Slave. Even watching Fiddler on the Roof, great moral questions that need to be wrestled with.
Have you ever seen the old 50s movie with Victor Mature in it, Samson, Delilah story? That's what I remember watching as a kid, and that makes him look like a hero. So if you need to fix on your hero, Samson, you watch that old movie.
Well, we need to wrap up pretty soon. This makes me wonder, do we teach critical thinking in schools, high school or college in any way, in any required classes?
Yeah.
Teach kids how to make good choices, decisions?
I don't think so.
There is coursework in college, especially the graduate level.
Well, yeah, but just in regular college. As you get older in law school, they're into critical thinking.
You don't want to bring that up today because they're against, you know, what
Oh.
they think's being taught. That's.
Yeah, the whole critical race theory.
Yeah, it's a
issue.
critical race theory.
Yeah, I think a lot of parents have said, what are you telling my Johnny to do to question his religion? Or, you
Well,
know,
and
question
The whole
anything.
deal there is they've made it they've named it critical race theory, but that's not, you know,
Not really what it is.
no,
Yeah.
that's not what's being taught.
But people believe that. A friend of mine, I was talking to her the other day, and she's a retired teacher, and we were just talking about it, and she goes, they teach it in the schools. I'm like, they do not. And she was a teacher, so that made me like, that she believed that they taught it in the school, but yet she was a retired teacher. I couldn't like quite get that, you know?
Actually, in a way, they do teach, it's called history.
Well, yeah.
Very selectively they teach it.
Yeah.
If you teach
But I
real
mean,
history, you won't
it's
need to
not,
teach
they don't
CRT.
teach critical
It's
race
self-evident.
in school.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ron, for a great presentation. week, we're gonna have a speaker about homelessness in Denver. Friend of Gene Dawson's, who has done extensive work with homeless, and he's gonna tell us about what Denver's doing and the problems and how we should be thinking about this critically. Okay, thanks, everybody. Have a good week.
Thank you, Ron. Bye.
That's the point of this class, to be thinking about what. Well, how much-